I've done hundreds of interviews within my career. You kind of come to a point where you almost know whether you feel someone's going to be a good fit or not after you've done enough interviews. And that kind of will transform later on as well into existing employees as to, is this person good or are they not good? Something interesting that I definitely have seen happen is that sometimes the right fit happens with the right supervisor.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight. I'm joined today by Mordechai Wolhendler. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. For people who aren't familiar with you, how would you introduce yourself?
So I'm the CEO of GlattHealth Consulting Group, as well as a co-founder and event host with the Home Care Show.
Now, in your work with GlattHealth, you've spent a lot of time in the home care industry. Tell me a little bit about what GlattHealth does. I know there's probably a lot of people who may have heard the name, but not really familiar with the services that you guys provide.
I'll start with actually my background. So before starting GlattHealth, I was with home care agency. I was an operator, chief operating officer with Hamaspik Home Care. Later did a short stint with Preferred Home Care as well. But in terms of GlattHealth, we're a home care consulting group. We have three core areas that we focus on. One is helping agencies that are in the startup phase, so going through their licensure processes and so on. And the second is for agencies that are in growth mode, so helping them with some of the RFPs, different types of back end support policies, helping them with RFPs, as well as any ongoing assistance that they may need. And the third area is mergers and acquisitions, people looking to purchase, looking to sell, and everything kind of in between. So we're really there to service agencies from startup to the point where they want to exit and kind of supporting them throughout that process.
Yeah. What are the biggest kinds of projects that you're helping some of these growth mode companies with these days?
So it really varies very, very much. On an ongoing basis, the biggest projects that we've been doing has been working with agencies on their annual reporting requirements. So we're based in New York. New York is a great example of a state that needs and has a bunch of different reports that have to happen. Most states have some form of a cost report. New York makes sure to have almost multiple kind of forms of that report. So it's helping with things like that. We also do a lot with different grants that are out there, helping them with things of that nature. And of course, the other thing is any types of communication with the state and any other payer sources. So the way I try to explain what we do from a layman's perspective is a home care agency as a license is kind of like a building. When you're building a building, you have to start with getting all your, having the architect write up the plans, the drawings. It has to be filed with the Department of Buildings. You have to get permits for everything, and then you need a certificate of occupancy and yada, yada, yada. I view a home care agency that is, licensed or certified as the same way. You have to have that. You want to add a county, you want to move from one location to another. Any change that you want to do like that, you do need to let the state know about that. And there's a process that has to happen for that. So those are the types of work that we do on an ongoing basis. That changes based on who the actual owner, agency is and what they need.
And there's an upcoming event in February that we're really excited to support. It's called the Home Care Show, and it's happening in South Florida. Talk a little bit about that, kind of the vision for the event, what people should expect should they choose to come.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. Looking forward to having us engaged at that event. It's the Home Care Show. So it's something that we started in 2021 in New York. We're seeing a need for an event that really targeted executives. What we were seeing as people came to conferences, it was great the first few years you're there. It's great for education. You learn something, you meet some new people. Once you're in it for a few years, it starts tapering down. The interest stops being there. You sit there for an entire day. And if you walked out with 3 sentences that were kind of interesting, you did well type of idea. So we wanted to target something that would be specifically to executives. And we did this factoring in not just education, but giving them an experience, giving them an opportunity for networking, getting to meet people. And it's been wildly successful in New York. So it's not just New York agencies that attend, but it's New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. It's the largest event in the Northeast. And it's a real mix between kind of learn, work, and play type of idea, because it is a great experience. People enjoy themselves, the ambiance, the vibe. It's very hard to describe if you haven't actually been there. The event that we're doing in February is slightly different. We are doing it in Miami, Florida. It's not based in Florida because of the Florida agencies or the Southeast. It's done there just as a destination location. It is targeted to anyone in the US. The focus is on multi-state operators and operators who are in growth mode, and going through that and really talking about the issues and the things that are relevant to them. Where if you're very, very regionally based, you don't necessarily have the same challenges as when you now have completely separate, offices, different companies. There's a lot of different things. So we try to focus on bringing in the content and vendors that are applicable to companies that are now in multiple states.
Well, thanks for joining the show today. I bring people on here who've accomplished a lot in their careers to ask them, instead of about all the stuff that went well and the successes they had, instead to ask them about the big mistake that they made that changed the way that they think about life and about business. So, Mordechai, what's your big mistake?
So they say that a mistake is only a mistake if you don't learn anything. I'll rephrase that for you. My biggest lesson within home care was actually very soon after I started. I was tasked with taking an existing agency, what we had in the Lower Hudson Valley region in New York, and expanding that into the New York City region. Now, when I went into this, I was like, okay, copy paste. We have an existing structure. We have everything that's there. It's should not be a big deal to actually make this happen. And that could not be further from the truth. From the recruitment to the pay rates, the regulations that were New York City specific, just the general attitude of people, the actual business model. New York City is very much it's a volume game. Outside of New York City, even in the rest of the state, you don't have that the same way. It was completely different than what I expected. And going into it, the first few months, I thought, okay, this is going to be relatively easy. And then I had to learn home care as to start with, and then actually have to go in and relearn home care from scratch for New York City purposes.
It reminds me of a friend of mine who his holding company acquired an agency up in the UP, the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And so, they're not super urban. They're not in New York City. They're not in Boston. And so they were like, well, we know kind of rural areas and we know how to take care of folks in those types of spaces. And what they found was that, the model that they built and had been able to replicate several times, sometimes you can copy paste, but not always, had to completely kind of go back to the drawing board on how they scheduled and how they managed the territory. And it's one of those things, even if you've had, 3 or 4 times of expanding operations from one place to another, and it's been relatively seamless, you can find a different business environment where, oh, now all bets are off and everything's completely different. What do you think was the thing that you thought, if everything else is different, this one thing's going to be the same, and that one thing was still kind of different?
The regulations is what I'll say as a starting point. Although I knew it was different, New York City just has its own way of doing things, and it was completely different and what their expectations were. And it was a lot of fun getting to learn how that works and needing to update handbooks and so on and so forth. That was definitely number one, as that was completely different. The other thing that was completely different is really the business model itself. And the rest of the state, when you're dealing with a patient and you're dealing with reimbursement, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's private pay, whatever it may be, your spread between what it costs you direct care pay compared to what you're collecting is relatively large, in the sense that you have to factor in all the recruitment as well as travel and so on and so forth. When you come to New York City, it's completely different in the sense that you're getting paid, it's almost a penny business. You do need to pay a lot more for the direct caregivers, but sometimes your total reimbursement is going to be less than it would be in an upstate region. where sometimes the pay rate in New York City is going to be, meaning your mandated pay rate can be a few dollars more, but you're actually getting reimbursed a few dollars less. And it is very interesting in that aspect because now you have to change the way you're thinking about things, right? It's not so much about how you're recruiting, and you have to be really, really operating 100% efficiently in New York City in order to be making money. I don't like talking specifically about New York City and making this whole conversation about that, but New York is very, very unique in that aspect. You can have, small mom and pop company that has 750 patients, and sometimes they're not even making money. And you look at that in the rest of the nation, and they're like, they can't even imagine something like that. But that's kind of the way it is, especially with dealing with Medicaid. So, private pay obviously would be different, but when you're dealing with Medicaid, that's kind of the model you're working with. And the other thing I say in terms of it being completely different as a business model is the attitude of people. The pace that people move at in the city is very different than anywhere else. The expectations are different. Your callback timeframes have to be different. The amount of time you're spending on the phone, you have to go straight to the point. You can't start, it's very, very different from almost every aspect that you touch within New York City versus other parts of the state. It is completely, completely different. So that for me was a very big learning curve getting to that point. But that would, all in all, that would be the biggest lesson I've learned. Obviously, I've learned a lot more starting to work with companies that are in different regions of the United States and different areas that are, have their own unique challenges. But, specifically my experience with that transition, yep, that's what it was.
Makes sense. What was the biggest change that you guys made? Like, I don't know, either in mindset or in process. I mean, it could be like a technology implemented, but that helped you guys turn the corner and get efficient enough to be able to make the new territory work.
The big challenge we faced was that New York City is a very, very cutthroat market, a lot of competition, a lot of saturation in a sense. And the question was, how do you differentiate yourself, make yourself unique? And that was where we really had to figure that part out. And eventually did figure out how we can make ourselves unique within that, and went after a specific target that very few other companies actually understood. And it was a target that we understood the population, understood the background behind it, and focused on that population and grew it, very nicely. Actually, in a sense, the idea behind the home care show that we're doing, like the national edition, comes from this first lesson on my end, because it was something that I experienced myself having done that, trying to do that copy paste and realize it doesn't work. And then as I got into it, I realized there's so many more people who kind of have that outlook. Where I'm doing successfully in one area, I can go to another area. That is so, so far from the truth, in the sense that sometimes it works, but other times you have areas that are completely, completely different. And we did the event last year, and we had a conversation about whether it's better to grow organically or not. Anyway, one of the panelists on that said something very interesting. He said, I opened up in another state. Once I had that location, what I started doing was every day on my drive home and on my drive to work, I actually took a different route every single day. He says, taking a different route led me to understand the different areas, different cultures, what was going on. It got me to really, really feel what was actually out there, and gave me a good understanding of what was going on in the actual, territory. And I think that that's something that, people really need to understand when they're going into new territory, understanding the demographic of the people there. Who are they? Going back to New York City for a second, sometimes it's 2 blocks over, you have a completely different, industry, because you just went from, within Queens, every 3 blocks, you feel like you're in a different country. So you have that aspect. And when you don't understand, the territory you're in, you don't understand the demographics of people that are living there, and, what talks to them. You really need to understand the cultures that are out there to get that. And that was, kind of one of the reasons that we felt it was so important to do a show that specifically spoke about these issues, how to work on them, and so on and so forth.
Okay, great. Well, I want to transition to the next part of the show where I ask you about something that's underrated in home care. People typically overlook it, but you think it's actually really valuable.
I would have to say the why factor is something that people don't look at enough. The why factor, meaning understanding what makes people tick, why people do certain things. As an example, when somebody wants to sell their agency, one of the first questions we want to understand from them is why are they looking to sell it? Because understanding why somebody wants to sell it completely alters the deal structure. Very often people ask me, what's a typical deal look like? There's no such a thing as a typical deal. And the workings of a deal will actually look, it really depends on a few different factors, but the why the seller is selling is sometimes the biggest factor of how a deal is going to be structured. If somebody's selling because they're tight and they need cash, we understand that there's a need for speed. And sometimes it's worth it to go with rather somebody who's going to pay a little bit less with quicker payments than somebody who's going to pay more, but spread out over a longer period. So, there's that why factor. I think that no call, no show is something that everyone struggles with across the industry. If we can understand why somebody was a no call, no show, what's driving them, what actually happened there, what's the psychology behind it, you can try to motivate them to actually do it. You can utilize a platform like Engage to motivate them and to give them that. But, you want to make sure that you're appropriately motivating them and understanding why they're doing certain things, why they're not being in compliance will help you with figuring out how do we get to be compliant.
I think one of the things, and this is like me as a person who sells stuff for a living, but like one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is like getting beyond like the rapport level answer and getting into the real why. And so what have you learned that helps you to get beyond just the like surface level justification for the decision making and getting to like the heart of the issue?
It's hard for anyone to say that they've gotten to that point. One of the things for myself is having the experience as an operator allows me to understand the mindset, understand what's going on. I very often will get calls about certain question, how can I do X, Y, and Z? And my mind kind of immediately starts racing as to why is this person looking to do X, Y, and Z? And trying to understand the psychology behind it. And very often having that mindset of understanding why the person is looking to do something, because been there, done that, allows me to actually, in certain scenarios, ask them about it. Like, are you trying to do X, Y, and Z? Because if yes, maybe we can do something else and come up with some alternatives for them. So I know that's not really an answer to get to your question. But from my perspective in dealing with agencies and understanding the why factor for me with what they need from my side of it, it is primarily understanding their business, understanding where they're coming from. And it depends on, a lot of it is relationship based. So if you have a good relationship with somebody, you can kind of understand right away whether they're, giving you the runaround or they're giving you the right reasons. Because sometimes people will just say right out, XYZ is why I'm trying to do something. But once somebody is in that mode of not wanting to tell you, sometimes it gets to be very, very difficult, especially in home care. As much as I feel like there's a great rapport sometimes between different agency owners, but there is still an aspect of competition there. And sometimes people are always hiding, we do X, Y, and Z, and nobody else can know what we do, even though there's nothing proprietary about what you're doing. We all, a million other guys are doing the same thing, but there is very often people still, think that way. So it sometimes is hard to really get the why factor with my personal dealings. Working with home health aides, that could be very different. It's a lot of the same concepts as relationship. If you have the right relationship with them, very often you'll get the right answers. But it is something that is very, very difficult, in general, working with home health aides. It's one of the biggest challenges within the industry, given that your product essentially is human beings, and, there's no quality control over that, in a sense. Like, it's not, we'll go down to the factory and make sure they're doing it better. It's like, it doesn't work that way. So it's very, very difficult dealing with, with people.
Yeah, it's kind of the magic of home care, and kind of the most frustrating thing about home care is at the end of the day, it's a very human service, and it relies on people showing up and being reliable and doing the thing. And, there's a lot of things that can go sideways in a person's day to make that not happen. So I think that's well said.
Yeah. I mean, you hear all types of reasons. This child care didn't have enough money for the bus. In home care, that's like an everyday occurrence.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a little bit like excuses to get an extension on a paper in college. It's like, how many grandkids or how many grandparents does one person have is kind of the question. So yeah, well, good. Well, I want to ask you, we talked about a big mistake that you made in your career, but I want to hear about a little mistake that you see other home care owners make all the time. And if they quit, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
So one thing it's hard to talk about everyone else. I'll talk about myself. One thing I've experienced has been blaming myself for some of what my employees were doing, in the sense that if an employee is not performing adequately, kind of blaming yourself, where maybe I didn't train them right, maybe I didn't give them the right environment, I'm not giving them the right support, and so on and so forth. Obviously, you need to try and aim and give them that. But if you're doing kind of what you need to, at least a basic level, you have to stop blaming yourself and start just expecting the employee to do it, because the right employee will conform to your organization, to your structure, and work with you in a way that you need to be worked with. I have never verified this, but I've heard that Donald Trump said something along the lines of, the worst thing for a company is a good employee. And you're like, what does that mean? But effectively, a great employee is a great employee. A bad employee, you get rid of. It's that good employee who's like manageable, but like not ready to. So sometimes it's those people who are. That's a big mistake sometimes, to kind of continue to blame yourself, or I'll give you another chance, or so on and so forth. It's also a big mistake not to outline KPIs and so on and so forth prior to going in, because you want to make sure that you know what the expectations are and everyone is on the same page. But if you're going to blame yourself because that person didn't get to where they needed to get to, that's an issue.
Yeah. There's always the question of like, it's a hire slow, fire fast kind of conversation. But there's always the question of like, are people able to grow and change? Are people capable of increasing their capabilities? And the answer for some hires is like, no, not really. It's just a bad fit. They're not the right person. But I would guess in your career, you've also seen people, kind of grow into a role that maybe went from being a good employee to a great employee. And so how do you think about the balance between, this is somebody who we kind of need to cut ties with because they're a drain on the organization and like they're taking too much time and attention from everybody else who can't focus on the main stuff, versus the kind of person that like with the right nudge could become a really excellent contributor?
I think the key differentiator there is typically attitude. Yeah, very often you have people who are overly dramatic, everything is a big issue and so on. Like those are the people who are sometimes the biggest strain on the organization. There's also something about trusting your gut. I've done hundreds of interviews, within my career. You kind of come to a point where you can almost know whether you feel someone's going to be a good fit or not after you've done enough interviews. And that kind of will transform later on as well into existing employees as to, is this person good or are they not good? Something interesting that I definitely have seen happen is that sometimes the right fit happens with the right supervisor. So I had an employee once who had started out under a specific supervisor and was not doing well. They were given, warnings and told XYZ is what we need from you and so on and so forth. And the person just was not performing. Right before the supervisor was ready to fire them. Right before that, the supervisor ended up kind of leaving the company and moving to something else. And not going to get into details, but kind of decided, you know what, why do I need to fire this person? Let the new supervisor fire them. Which was an interesting choice, but that's effectively what happened. A new supervisor came in and told this person, listen, I've known you for a year, but I am ignoring anything that we've known up to this point, starting from scratch. Let's start from a clean slate. And this person became a high performer for the company. A year or so later, actually got an offer from a different agency and ended up moving away because they had become so successful in what they were doing that they had gotten a much better offer from somewhere else. So that was something that, it stuck with me as a very interesting thing, where you can have someone who is doing terribly, then goes to a different supervisor and is doing great. So, that fit, it has to be there. And kind of goes back to what I said earlier about sometimes the employee needs to work with the structure that they have, because the supervisor is the supervisor or the boss or whoever it may be. If that person, if it just doesn't work well together, it's not going to work.
Yeah. It's a little bit like, I was talking to somebody earlier today and it's like, well, what makes a good caregiver? And I was like, well, it depends on who you ask, because there's some clients that this caregiver talk too much. They're way too talkative. I wish that they, wouldn't talk so much. And you put them with another client and they're a perfect fit because that person wants somebody with the gift of gab. And so I think similarly, right, like there's so much about this that's fit There's so much about this about like right place, right time. And that extends beyond just like client caregiver fit and extends to our administrative teams is making sure that you've got the right people in the right seats. And a lot of times context is everything. And, that employee is a great example of like under the right management and leadership structure and whatnot, they could really excel.
One of the things that immediately struck me within home care was the disparity between the way we hire office staff and the way we hire caregivers. Because very often, in order to be able to service the case properly, we need to have the caregivers onboarded well in advance. When you're hiring for the office, you're looking at what is the position, what do we want from them, who's the supervisor, making sure it all kind of comes together. Yet, as much as you try, so to speak, to do that when you match a caregiver and a patient, it's still not the same process as the way you're doing it in the office. And I wish there was a way to reverse that where you're really looking at, okay, here's the patient, here's what they're looking for. This patient wants somebody who's going to stay in the corner and, use the servant staircase and all that stuff. And I don't want to see them ever. And then you have another one who's, I want the emotional support. I want someone who's going to be there to chat with me and play chess and so on and so forth. So it's very, I'd love to have a way and a mechanism to really match up a caregiver based on the actual job that is needed and hire that way. But we don't really have that lag time.
Yeah, you've got to have caregivers ready and available to go to work, which means you can't be as selective about who you hire. Like you've got to hire good caregivers, but you're not necessarily able to hire the right caregiver for the right position because the lag time is just too great for that to work.
Right, and who's a good caregiver? Right, it's very, very difficult to know who's a good caregiver. Obviously, there's certain things that you want in everybody, but understanding who's a good caregiver is very difficult, and that's where it's almost the why factor comes in there again, because I've sat in almost every seat within home care. I've done the HR processes. I've met with certain caregivers who were well-spoken. They seem to be extremely responsible. Like everything on the initial intake for these people indicated that this is going to be a great employee for us. And we spoke about, okay, we're actually going to have orientation tomorrow morning. XYZ is, here's the timing. It's in the same location. Let's see you here. Sure, of course, did all their paperwork. Not somebody who, ran out, did everything, never showed up, never answered a phone call again. So, maybe it's my face they didn't like, but understanding why that actually happens is sometimes crucial.
The friend of the show, Bob Roth, one of the things that he always talks about is like his first question in the interview process is why do you want to be a caregiver? And I think like that's one of the things that we've observed across home care agencies is like the best caregivers are caregivers like in their bones. Like they're caregivers when they're at work and when they're not at work. And those are the kinds of people, and like obviously like staffing shortages, hiring pressures are what they are. Like you can't only hold out for A players in most situations. It's just not feasible. But that's how I think, who is or maybe is not a good fit is, do they have a motivation? Is there a reason why they want to be able to be a caregiver?
Great question to ask and for people to add to their intake packets.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wind up here, we talked about a big mistake, a lot of different mistakes, but I like to end every episode on a high note. And so tell me about something that's happened lately that you're proud of.
Two things I'll say that I'm proud of. One, we recently held the home care show in New York, the Northeast regional one. And this is the first year we did it as a 2-day event versus a 1-day, come and go type of thing. We hosted a full 2-day event. It was very, very successful. Both days were very well attended, and it's something that we're very proud to have managed to get that done and gone from a 1-day event to 2-day event. Time will tell whether we keep that or not, but that's one thing. Another thing is completely different in the sense that I've been wearing glasses since I'm like 10 or something. I've always hated glasses though. So when I was like 15, 16, I got contacts, and in the beginning, teenage years and beginning of my 20s and whatnot, I was able to put it in the morning, take them out at night, and almost had zero need for wearing glasses at all. Lately, it's been, my glasses go in an hour or two after I woke up. I'm sorry, my contacts go in an hour or two after I woke up, and then by like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., it's got to come out already. So it's been this like changing, put them on, take them off, put them on, take them off type of idea. And I've been grappling with this idea of going to get laser surgery. So I get rid of the whole thing. And I've held off on doing it between being afraid and just being occupied with a whole bunch of different things. So I consider it kind of a win that I actually made an appointment to see a doctor, do consultation as to whether or not it's appropriate for me. I think we often don't give ourselves enough time to ourselves. We don't take the time to take care of ourselves, and this is something that I'm doing it now. And before the consultation, they don't want you wearing contacts for 7 days, so I got my glasses this week. So if I'm irritable, you know why.
That's why. I'm a recent glasses wearer, even more recent contacts wearer, and I learned you're not supposed to shower. At least the ones I have, you're not supposed to shower in them, which is a whole thing. I don't know. Maybe other people do, but that's what they told me is don't shower in the contacts, which you got to take them out. Then
That holds for the first 2 months, and then I think everybody kind of starts wearing them in the shower. Don't tell anybody.
Cool. I will not tell a soul. Oh, that's good. Well, before we get out of here, what do you want to plug?
If you're a multi-state operator or you're in growth mode or looking to expand, you should definitely check out the home care show we're doing February 17th and 18th in Miami, Florida. If David will be there. I'll be there. Looking forward to seeing you guys.
That sounds great. Well, Mordechai, thanks for joining the show right before the end of the year. So happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Same here. Thank you for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks. On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.